Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Those of you here in person and those of you joining online to this last session of Today Conference, Social Outcome Conference 2023. My name is Mara Iroldi, and I'm the Academic Director of the Government Outcomes Lab here at the Blavatnik School of Government, hosting the conference and this book launch. I only have 2 minutes of welcome to tell you why we think it's important for us to host this book launch. First, because it's the first time we are doing a book launch, and we are always at the forefront of innovation. We want to try something new, and this is a book launch. Even more, this is a book pre-launch. The book is not yet ready. The copies you see are a proofread copy because we are ahead of the game all the time. So you will hear what is in this book before it comes out. And you will say, I was there, I heard it for the first time at the Social Outcome Conference 2023. Those people are really ahead of the game. Jokes aside, there are two main reasons why it's important for us to host this book launch. One is about the why. The book is about the social economy science, and why social economy organizations are well placed to deliver social outcomes. We will hear from our panelists why this is the case, but there is also a how. And the how, every chapter of this book, often books are written with the first part, this is the theory, and then there are some application. This book, every chapter has theory intertwined with practice, and is very much the style of our conference and our community. So it is a privilege for us to host this book launch that is in style with the culture of the Social Outcome Conference. I will disappear soon because Professor Mario Calderini from the Polytechnic of Milano will chair the session, but I want to invite Professor Jonathan Michi, who was very generous with his time. He's Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor of Innovation and Knowledge Exchange, and he agreed to give us some of his time to welcome you to the university. Professor Michi.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and indeed the whole of the University of Oxford, I'd like to welcome everybody here, both the conference and to this event, and to University of Oxford's finest modern building, certainly. You may have seen it's got a new neighbourly rival growing up, the new Schwarzman Centre for the Humanities, but certainly currently the university's finest modern building. And also, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Kellogg College, which is co-sponsoring the conference and the event, because the reason is we like to think of ourselves as the University of Oxford's most innovative college. I realise some of you might be thinking, well, that's a pretty low bar, but I'll explain very briefly. Up until the college was formed in 1990, you wouldn't have been allowed to study part-time. So Georgie wouldn't have been able to do his doctorate at Oxford. Sometimes when I say that to people, they say, well, it can't technically be true because you can't have a business school without an executive MBA, which allows executives to continue with their careers. And I have to say, dear God, you don't think Oxford would have permitted a business school in 1990. No, so first came Kellogg College, then came part-time degrees, then came the business school, and then I'm pleased to say came the Blavatnik School, which has really made the University of Oxford so much more impactful and innovative. And finally, I'd just like to say what a pleasure it is to welcome this book launch. I saw it 24 seconds before the end of the film. There were some great shots of Blavatnik's other neighbour, the Oxford University Press, across the road. And Oxford University Press is bigger and more successful than all the American presses, and all the American academic presses and Cambridge University Press put together. So with that, I'm greatly looking forward to the book launch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, good afternoon, and thank you, University of Oxford and Blavatnik School of Government, and thank you all for being here for this launch of the Social Science Economy book. Which is a very important moment for the community of social science scholars, of course. And I'm here with three friends, colleagues, and experts in the field, which I will introduce in a minute. Let me say that the word symbolic and iconic are a bit overexploited nowadays. But this is the way I'm living this moment, and I think that these words are well deserved for this book, because this book is the collection and also the material representation of all the efforts that an entire community of social scientists and economists have produced in the recent years. And I'm sure that I'm sharing this feeling with all the authors that are in this book, and the efforts our efforts were in the direction of offering new solutions, sometimes complement and some other time oppose mainstream economic thinking, and offering different perspective to the societal challenges that we are facing in terms of inequalities and of course the consequences of climate change. And I think that the book itself offers a number of very interesting solutions and perspective. What is this book about? We will hear that from my friend Georgie, but I would like, there is one sentence among many others in the book that really struck me in its ability to represent the spirit of the book. And allow me to read this sentence for you. By advocating for a social economy science, we thus not want to create a new and siloed field of research that feels artificial or that could be perceived as pointless rebranding exercise. Instead, we seek to establish a connecting device, this is the important part, across the different perspectives, organizational forms and practices which we laid out above and which to date rarely connect with each other. We do so in order to unleash what a social economy science perspective can teach us about how to transform the economy and make society more resilient. So why do I think this sentence is particularly relevant? The reason is that it is a sort of epistemological statute that ties in many of the chapters of this book. And again, we have tried our best to avoid creating another silence, but to create a sort of connecting device that would offer different perspective to different representation of the phenomenon of social economy, which is becoming so popular both in practice and literature. We're not here only to celebrate the launch of this book, but also to get prepared to the new challenge. And the new challenge, I think, is bringing the social economy at the next level, which is the political level. It is somehow mysterious to me how, despite the efforts of very important institutions like the OECD, the European Commission, the United Nations with their resolutions, very recent resolutions, social economy has not become an ideological pillar of political economic debate. It has not been at the very center of political debate in member states, and has not been adopted or embraced by any political party in real terms. This is mysterious because I think the perspective of the social economy and the perspective that we offer in the book and the perspective that many scholars have offered are a very clear political platform, political action platforms. And there are so many centers all around Europe, like the Government Outcome Lab here at the Blavatnik School, that are ready to offer brilliant solutions to some of the political challenges that we are facing nowadays. So I really think, Georgie, that this book has to be, of course, a very relevant contribution to the literature and to social economy science, as the title suggests, but also the first brick, the first pillar to a new generation of policies based on the concept of social economy. Now I have two contractual duties here. The first one is to wave the book that is here, just to show you that it exists, and soon you'll be able to read it, but also to chair a session with my friends and colleagues, and to moderate this debate, which has to start, Goji, with a brief description of what the book actually is. What is the content, the ambition, and the problems we have faced, of course. So you are the first one.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Mario. Thanks a lot, especially to Andrea, to Mara, for giving us such a brilliant platform, for Kellogg College and Jonathan to support it. And I think it's really a wonderful venue to discuss these issues, especially because we really want to use theory and concepts and research as a tool for making change, right? I'll give you a bit of history of the book. So it goes back to an event that was held in early 2021. It was planned for 2020, but then you all know what happened, right? And it was planned initially as a small sister event to what was the European Social Economy Summit, which was supposed to take place in Mannheim, where I still continue to live. And they, the European Commission asked us, don't you want to do a bit of, research, a small research gathering around this? What we had initially planned was like an intimate gathering of 50 to 80 researchers. And then through COVID, we went online and we had more than 800 registered participants, which was, it was the early days of COVID. So everyone was really, keen on doing online stuff. So that might have played a role as well. But I think, and that was the discussion that we had later on, this was a signal that, the interest is now there, right? And I think that's one of the very few positive outcomes of COVID, that people become more conscious of what the social economy and what social economy science can actually bring to the table in terms of addressing the most pressing challenges that we have, right? And so we had this conference there, we had amazing speakers, including Mario, including Eleanor, and the interesting bit behind this book is that we lost no one from this initial speaking event where they had a first sketch of their chapters to actually producing this book with Adam Swallow, who's here from Oxford University Press. And the interesting bit as well is that it's going to be available open access, which means that everyone can, in fact, at least get an electronic copy whenever they want. And what we're talking about is that this was a strange kind of paradigm shift that we felt working in the field for 10, 15 years and more. And you were always met with some skepticism, right? You were saying, I'm working on social entrepreneurship. And people were like, what is this supposed to be, social and entrepreneurship? That doesn't go together, right? Or I was telling a friend, I'm working on social impact measurement. And then, does that have anything to do with social media? And I'm like, no, it's got the word social, but it's something completely different that people weren't even able to grasp. And I think the conversations that we've just been having, including the last session, really shows that the things that, the social economy can bring to the table are really valuable, right? And Mara has already told you that this is also a group of, I would say, scholar practitioners and practitioner scholars, which makes each of the chapters look into research, use empirical or theoretical approaches, but at the same time always has very strong practical and policy implications. So I do really hope that it's going to be a bit of a, a master plan in terms of, what you can do in relation to improving the situation that the social economy is facing, right? And so we have three different sections in the book. One that we call Innovation for Impact, which is looking at the development of the impact investing market. I had a conversation earlier contrasting it with the more subtle ways and maybe the less rigorous ways and the less value-laden ways of ESG, right? Really looking into, what does investing for impact mean? How does that develop and how can we have spillovers into this whole debate about ESG? We have one section that is looking at the social economy as an agent of change. For instance, we have a chapter by Julie Battilana, who was doing the keynote last year here at the conference, where she's thinking about can social business and how can social business become the norm, right? How do we mainstream the best practices that we have from these kinds of organizations to move into mainstream business. And the third part, and that's most relevant to our discussion probably, is really about, relational contracting. Eleanor has a chapter in there in terms of social impact bonds and how they are actually enabling that rather than, being just a really cool and fancy financing mechanisms. We're looking at things like social procurement as well, at citizen participation and involvement. We talked a lot about, lived experience and the value of that. And I think that's why we give a relatively or very holistic perspective that is really trying to leverage all of the learnings that we've made over the years.
Thank you, Gorgi. And yes, I think that the word skepticism was about a bit of an euphemism to describe the way social entrepreneurship was received in conversations even 5 years ago. So you've been soft. But things change, and the spirit of time, the zeitgeist, is really different now. And I'll get back to Gorgi in a minute in the conversation. By the way, Gorgi is an associate professor of sustainability at the SAP Business School in Paris, ESCP in English, in Paris. But now I think we can move to our discussion, and I'm happy to introduce our second guest in the order of the conversation, and happy to introduce Bayo Adelaya, who is the chief executive of Do It Now, a community interest-based company based in London, UK. And beside your academic background, I think you can bring to this conversation a very interesting practitioner perspective and help us understand what are the emerging needs and the urgent issues that are perceived by the ones that day by day try to find brilliant solution to huge social problems. Bayo, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation with all of you, and thank you for your contributions throughout the day. I've been just so excited and enjoyed every part of it. Right, so my background is I was a researcher at the London School of Economics and the Personal Social Services Research Unit, PSSRU. If you guys remember, it's now been renamed. 7 years ago, I left LSE to start, and the next journey I went into was starting Do It Now, which is a racial justice organization focusing on the impact sector and providing infrastructure to predominantly Black people leading within their local communities. The link between the two vocations is one, just a love for innovating and being able to be on the ground and talk to people and see what they're doing and support them. But my difficulty at that point starting in this journey was that I was saying to the group on a call, I was like, I'll give it 10 years. I'll just like pedal to the metal 10 years, and we're 7 years in now, and the problem just keeps getting bigger rather than smaller. But the focus was, if we can get enough Black people in the UK that are interested, and our community overwhelmingly shows a significant interest more than any other in being involved in local community initiatives, in volunteering, in doing some kind, contributing to the local economy in one way or another. If we can formalize those interventions, if we can measure them, if we can support them to stabilize, learn from each other, innovate and grow, we will be able to create a future that is better for everyone. I'm a very big believer in the idea of shared genius and democratized genius, the idea that anyone can have the solution to the problem. We just need to give the person that opportunity to vocalize it in a way that makes sense for them and to provide the data and the information that is necessary to a shared space that will allow them to flourish in collaboration with others. So, I mean, that has not come without its challenges. I say the solution felt simple at the beginning. It felt like, oh, well, if I just, my background before LSE was entrepreneurship. So I thought, oh, if I just teach a whole bunch of people how to build a business, surely that will be enough of a solution. But that came with it. So how are they going to get money for these things? Interestingly, there's very little academic research funding into, well, not interestingly, I'm preaching to the choir here, there's very little academic research funding into the type of work that we do. And so we've had to kind of cobble together based on the projects that we are able to deliver and our collaborative partners are able to deliver as well. But we found in our first funding program, so we provide grant funding between £3,000 and £40,000 to organizations, and have so far delivered £750,000 to organizations, and by the end of next year, I'm looking down the line here at my colleague, by the end of next year, that would have raised to about 2.5 million, I think. But the point of that, the growth of that, is to identify multiple ways of providing this money and attaching to that measurement outcomes. So attaching to that an expectation that they will collect information in a particular way, provide that to us, and help us understand the work that they're doing. So the very first pot of money that we did, which was 50,000-ish, 3,000-ish to 16 organizations, we got 834 applications for that £50,000, which was obviously not enough. We didn't have enough money, not nearly enough. And from that, we found out that about 60% of the money that goes into Black and brown-led organizations at the beginning stages certainly comes from the employment income of their founders. So my work in Do It Now started with me making a living elsewhere and giving about 1/3 to 2/3, depending on the year, of my income to Do It Now as a donation in order to run it. So that even despite my own academic background and my own kind of willingness to go into it as, oh, I know what these systems are, I kind of understand it, I've studied these things, I was still on the back foot trying to figure out a system. And so one of the things that I've really challenged us over the years, as we've built more and more of these programs, whether that's direct delivery into community so we can understand how our community is delivering. So we might deliver an employment program to understand employment programs and then help them build better employment programs. We have then co-designed with them repayable grant programs or kind of blended finance programs, and worked with others to consult with them to support our community better. But what we find is that the ecosystem remains incredibly disparate. It remains incredibly difficult to navigate despite the help. And within the sector, I think 360 Giving, so just, I mean, my references are very much practitioner based, so forgive me. But 360 Giving came out with a report recently that stated that 1,000 infrastructure organizations being the ones that support with strengthening voice, policy advocacy, fundraising support, capacity building in the form of any of the number of things that you would expect them to know in order to engage with the sorts of services that you're expecting them to engage with in your organizations, whether that's impact measurement to safeguarding to any number of things. 1,000 of them had closed in 10 years, and we were finding, the report found that the ones that were existing were starting to compete for funding with their beneficiaries in those infrastructure bodies. So when you are in 10 years, 12 years, however long it's been, of just crisis funding and austerity and difficulty navigating as a mainstream, widen that out to the communities that don't speak the language very well, didn't grow up here, don't know an accountant as have an accountant as a family member, or have someone who could help them understand any of these things within their direct network. You find it just keeps, it's a vicious cycle that keeps growing of people building on one mistake after another. One of the things I like to remind us of as we think about what our organizations are actually dealing with is most people across all of us, most people learn how to build a business from The Apprentice or Dragon's Den. That is not a bad thing. It's not a slight. It is a reality. Most people learn from observing. We don't have the tools and the resources and the skills and the ability to step out of ourselves in order to join one of the wonderful programs that are happening at Oxford, or any of the number of other courses that are available, or you don't think you need them. And you end up failing in a number of different ways and having to pick yourself up over and over again. So I suppose my contribution to this conversation, I hope, is one of how can we, within all of these conversations, understand that there is a contingency of lived experience leaders that have a deep resiliency and within them, a deep love for their local community and an extreme willingness to engage in it, but are almost certainly to a sad degree, almost depressing degree, left impotent by the system that they're existing in, and have a distinct inability to provide and produce the thing that they have in themselves and in their hearts to do. So if there's a legacy to in the next few years for Do It Now, certainly beyond the 10 years, but if there's a legacy for Do It Now, it will be that, or I certainly would hope, it will be that we connected the doors between the rooms, between the people here, the people in our community, the trusts and foundations that typically work with the types of organizations that we support, as well as the other different disparate groups that are seeking to engage with the types of work that we do.
Thank you, Bayard. That was, yes, of course.
I would just briefly want to pick up what you've discussed and sort of build a bridge to what we're covering in the book as well, and why, you know, people like you and people in the social economy are really role models in terms of, you know, how you engage for communities, how you endure, a much more difficult process than a general startup process, right? And how you also point us to the fact that we're not really thinking about this in the right terms, right? So we think, we know a lot about commercial startups, so let's do the same thing, right? That might not be the thing that you actually look out for, right? Even if you did the programs, maybe they are not equipping you with the right tools, right? So you're talking about relationship building, talking potentially also to policymakers to sort of change the field and everything, right? So first of all, it shows us, I think, the power of social economy types of action. And at the same time, it also shows us the dearth of, support structures. And we have another chapter, for instance, that's looking into funding schemes and like really fully fledged support programs like Portugal Social Innovation, which is a fascinating example. That's like one of my favorite ones, where they're really trying to sort of pool finance, to have really long-term finance. We were talking about it in the session earlier, so that you can actually, have your development over a very long period of time, right? I mean, there's this saying, it takes, a commercial startup 3 or 5 years to break even. For a social entrepreneur, sometimes it takes 20, right? And if we don't have, the capacity to actually sustain this, we're just going to lose, whatever power and energy went into it. So I think that's, how we hope through the book to, speak to those themes, but also provide some solutions.
I agree. Thank you. And thank you, Bayo, for this brilliant and remarkable contribution. And Bayo articulated a few challenges that are very important. And I was wondering whether we have the tools to face these challenges. And if, for example, relational contracting is one of the way, is a new agenda, a new set of tools to address these challenges. So I'll hand it over to you, Eleanor. Eleanor Carter is the research director of the Government Outcomes Lab at the Blavatnik School of Government. And yes, I think that what we expect to hear from you is whether we have these tools, relational contracting, which role it can play, and of course, what is the importance of cross-cutting research and perspective on a subject that is by definition structurally very articulated and multifaceted. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you. And I wonder if I might try to draw connections between some of your description, Georgie, of the book and Bayo, your concerns around the themes that you describe and the challenges. So I might focus on why this book is of particular relevance to participants at the Social Outcomes Conference, as well as practitioners like Bayo. I think one of the things that's notable is that the framing of the book is really generous and inclusive. It doesn't do that typical academic thing of tightening up definitions, and instead it has this connective function that you describe, Professor Calderini, in the conception of social economy. So it's generous in reaching out to include things, but the editors offer two really helpful theoretical hooks for connecting across the chapters. One is around institutional theory, but the other is around transition theory. So I think that means that we're not just looking at social economy actors and organizations as forms capable of responding as societal safety nets to the big issues of the day, although there is a bit of that. But I think it also positions the social economy as an enabler of transitions. And I think that begins to get at what some of Bio is describing. With this connective function and this ability to reshape other institutions and society at large. And I think an increasing acknowledgement of that helps us describe, articulate, and advocate for the advocates. And I think that's an important function of a book like this that positions this as not fully a disciplinary area, but this connective piece. It legitimizes the study of some of these constructs and embeds some of the work that we've been hearing about. One of the other things I wanted to comment on was the way in which this book really moves with the spirit of the Social Outcomes Conference in terms of braiding together those practitioner and academic perspectives. But I think of particular interest is this section on partnerships. So the audience here has been spending all day really tussling with these questions of how to partner better across the sectors and spanning beyond the social economy. What can that best look like in order to make change happen? And so I just wanted to give a few shout outs to some of the chapters that I think might begin to speak to some of this. So there's a chapter by Alessandro Sancino and colleagues who have a chapter on civic leadership. What does this look like? What does this place-based transformative leadership look like? And they have a chapter that compares different leadership constellations in Italy and the UK. And I think, Bio, that might speak to some of your concerns around the boldness that we might need to see on the part of some of our leaders to reach out and connect in different ways to different social economy actors. There's also a chapter that you mentioned, Georgie, by Antonio, the founder of Maize in Portugal, that really, I mean, I think there are probably a lot of people in this room that are keen to understand how to use European funds as a way to catalyze innovation. There's a chapter on that in this book. and so I think that will be a phenomenal interest to this group. There's another chapter on social procurement and how to promote social problem solving through that process. That's by Eva Varga and Malcolm Hayday. So certainly another theme that we've been picking up on in the conference around how to do procurement, maybe slightly differently in the cultural shifts. They offer some reflections on that and offer some really interesting illustrations. And I don't want to do too much self-promotion, but there is a chapter that Nigel and I have co-authored, which looks at social outcomes contracting. And we touch on these themes of relationalism. And we ask whether this approach might bring more relationalism to the way in which social economy organizations partner with government to tackle some of the most deep-seated and perplexing social issues in society. So I wanted to just wrap up by saying this is not dense in terms of an academic book. It's more of a handbook for ways of thinking about the social economy and the different ways to make positive change happen.
Very good, thank you very much. And indeed, among the reasons why I find it mysterious that social economy has not a relevant position in the political agenda is the fact that we have a wonderful prototype that is exactly the experience of Portugal in the use of structural funds and in other experiences. Yeah, and Georgie, there is something I was thinking on my way to Oxford today. It's a surprise question.
Yeah, not prepared.
But it's something I was thinking that it connects us with the political level and what government could do in order to promote and to exploit the potential of social economy. But my idea is we had one problem with social innovation. Okay, we have a huge tradition of social innovation, maybe 40 years of literature and practice. But then we always say social innovations fail because they have been wonderful to provide a very brilliant solution to local specific problems but never scale up. Now my question is it the next level, the social economy? What is the legacy of the content of this book to the social innovation literature? What would a random social innovation scholar from the 90s would think of this effort? Because I think in optimistic view, it can be a solution to the historical problem of social innovation, of not delivering scalable solution or solution that never scaled, and also sometimes to collapse under the burden of its pragmatism.
Mm-hmm.
Pragmatism, as we heard from the words of Bayo, is a wonderful thing, but it is also the structural problem of social innovation. Are we beyond this with the social economy perspective?
Yeah, to be honest, I think we have a few things to offer to this. And I think what's really great is, you know, you mentioned the UN resolution on the social economy. Just yesterday, there was a national strategy that was passed in Germany in parliament that, you know, even uses the word social innovation and social economy, at least the German translation of it. And I think that's a big step, right? Because that recognizes things are different. And I think we really need to sort of emancipate beyond. There was also this derogatory kind of statement that you sometimes got, right? You are, you know, working on social economy organizations. Oh, well, you know, that's like running a business just a bit easier because you don't really have to make a profit, right? And people sort of understand more and more that it's actually much more tricky to, you know,
much more difficult.
Really, you know, you were talking about homelessness and really finding a good solution for that and wrapping your head around that problem and then doing that in an economically maybe self-sufficient way. But, you know, that's the real challenge, right? And people are opening their eyes to that, I think. And we have a lot of things to bring, right? For instance, the huge experience that Portugal social innovation has made, right? And I think, of course, you can blame social innovation for dying so easily, but you can also blame the systems for not recognizing what it, you know, provides to society and not sustaining it properly, right? So we were talking about long-term contracts. We also have, you know, pointers in terms of, you know, how can you think about this in relation to sensing, you know, the lived experience, the, you know, groundbreaking stuff that's going on the ground, right? By the social entrepreneurs, by the change makers, and not, you know, forget about it or not even notice it for 5 years and then they get into trouble, right? You should, you know, as, you know, as policymakers, as those who are at the intersection, really be sensing this quite early on and thinking about, you know, the mainstreaming, right? As part of the process, right? It might take a long time, and the ultimate success might not be, you know, a unicorn in the business sense. It might be implementation into public service delivery, right? But if we just, you know, leave this gap open for too long, you know, things just die, right? And that's why I think we have a lot of pointers in terms of, you know, how you can identify the actors, how you can, you know, model business practices according to their role model, and how you can also help them sustain themselves and have an even bigger impact, right? Beyond the local communities and really at, you know, a regional or a national level.
Yeah, exactly. And then I want to hear from both Bayo and Eleanor. I'm just observing that at the very beginning of the new agenda of social economy, and quite the same with the impact investing agenda, at the very beginning we were facing two alternatives and we didn't know what would emerge. The first alternative was there is a new sector and a structural alternative that will emerge, or second option, we will have a sort of contamination agent to the mainstream sector. I think that we are having an answer today, and it is the game is a game of contamination. The role is really a role of contamination. The pioneers of impact investing, the pioneers of social entrepreneurship have not scaled up to a structural alternative, I think, but they are playing a huge contamination role to the mainstream that in the meanwhile is changing and evolving. And this is something that I think should be recognized to the merit of the social economy sector. And of course, this brings us to this is a huge challenge for the social economy. And probably the question we should ask ourselves is now, what can be done? Which better support? Because I strongly agree with your statement that, yes, we should also blame the ones that have not been able to provide systemic help to the social innovation sector, the social economy. And so what shall we do now? And what you expect from the ones, that is certainly the government, but in general institutions, to provide support to the social economy and to exploit the full potential of social economy. Bayo.
Thank you. So one of the things that we've been discussing within our own community more recently, in light of the cost of living crisis in the UK, is the challenge of accessing different types of financial support or financial opportunities. So there is a structural dependence on trusts and foundations as grant giving and projectized funding that limits the ability to innovate and be creative about the solution that you want to deliver. And it is so flash in the pan and so trendy that you, despite the proven impact of your work, you could still just lose the funding year on year because it's the strategic direction of a trust foundation that is a cornerstone of your funding challenge has moved on. I would hope that we're seeing a resurgence of intermediaries, or at least that's the name that we're using for it within our conversations, that is seeking to respond to the dispersal of the influence of infrastructure bodies. So based on what I've read and the conversations that we were having today, the thing that keeps coming to my mind is how can we potentially create more early stage programs that support organizations to come into the system at the earliest stage possible. So rather than, exactly as you were saying, rather than waiting for them to develop, we could invest in intermediaries that will say, we will take on the contractual obligations, we will take on the reporting, we will take on all of the back and forth that mitigates the opportunity for these smaller organizations to enter into these processes because of fear, challenge, lack of capacity, lack of understanding, and bring them onto it in smaller chunks. So potentially, this is what came to mind, and feel free to, in your own mind, say, that was dumb, but smile in front of me, please. So I was just thinking, wouldn't it be incredible if an organization could be part of a collaborative group that is being resourced to learn how to engage in these things, part of a group that's saying, yes, we're all together providing solutions towards solving a rough sleeping problem in a local place. And they get to learn from each other while being further represented by a larger intermediary that is answering these questions in a real way. And that intermediary is responsible for ensuring that those outcomes are being met. Well, if one fails, at least there's 15 others that could potentially be supported to deliver that outcome at the level that is being expected. Because it's still a numbers game at the end of the day. Most organizations will still fail. We see organizations in our cohorts stay around for 20 years or more, but the problem is they're staying around for 20 years or more with an income of like £5,000 and dwindling access to resources, dwindling an aging staff group. I met the most lovely, the loveliest woman who's been running her organization for, I think, 20 or 30 years. She was 82 and had no idea what to do next. And it's like, I wish there were all of these systems in place before, because what's happening right now is local governments are referring onto these organizations with no financial provision, no support, no training, burdening them emotionally, mentally, and financially. And they still have the contractual obligation to deliver on the basis of, yes, we didn't provide you with any money, but we gave you a dilapidated building, and we expect you to fix up that building while also providing services in it. So there are these somewhat exploitative processes that are taking place and dependent quite significantly on the emotional attachment that these people have to their local communities. And what I would like to see within the social economy is more structure that removes that sort of practice and allows organizations that really represent those communities to act as pseudo infrastructure bodies or intermediaries or whatever you call them, to take on that responsibility and support them to get to a place where in 10 years we can look back and say, actually, in the safety of that structure, there were some organizations that were able to test some new things, innovate, accelerate certain things, and potentially become their own innovative body in themselves where they're able to support other organizations as well.
Thank you. And Bio, so much of what you were just saying really connects to the challenges of the session that we were just in around formal relational contracting. And I think on two dimensions, you talk about this projectized funding and fragmentation. So there seems to be like a temporal piece here that we need to think about in terms of the time taken to really embed and grow relationships. We were talking about trust earlier too, the long-term nature of some of this work. And there's also something about sort of connective tissue. And you're talking about the need for connection across different organizations, both in the social economy sector, but also in the public and private sector. I think there are different words that are being used to describe some of this. And I love the one that Professor Alnor Ibrahim uses, which is ecosystem orchestrators. I think this gets at some of that structural need that you're describing, Bio, and the need to resource that. And that needing to be a collective effort. And I think it begins to speak to some of the questions that Professor Considine was raising in our first session around multi-actor public services. When we've got this complex array, who's doing the work of bringing that together? And I think it's a conversation that's happening in this room about how to really do better at that. So I really welcome that challenge from you, Bio, and hopefully it's the community in this room and around the book that can begin to do more work on that.
Excellent, thank you. And Georgie, I'll refer to you for some conclusion. Let me underline a few aspects that I feel relevant. The first one is, this book is also, I've been reading the book in the last few days, and this book is also an act of reconciliation in geographical terms. It is the first time I read a book or a paper on social entrepreneurship where I do not perceive the difference between the Anglo-Saxon social business approach, the continental Europe social entrepreneurship approach, or the Southern Hemisphere Indian approach. And I think this is a signal of achieved maturity, I believe. And this is the other thing. I want to underline one of your comments. Being a manager of a social enterprise is much more difficult than a traditional manager. And you perceive it, you understand it when you teach social entrepreneurship, when you teach business school students social entrepreneurship. They understand that they have to handle so many dimensions, and also the contamination effect is that also very boring managerial issues in traditional companies like accounting have become very, very interesting and exciting with the impact measurement thing. So I think, but I think transformation and cultural evolution, I think it's the key to bring this social economy science to the next level. And of course, there are still barriers and resistances. And many of the problems are coming from the third sector itself. For example, we wrote a book, a chapter on social tech, on technological intensity in social entrepreneurship. And that was not really appreciated by the traditional third sector. To say that the social enterprises have to remain labor intensive, and technology, even though it's a commodity, even though it's very cheap and easy to use, should not be adopted by the social entrepreneurship model. So still a lot to be done.
Yeah,
George.
I think just briefly trying to wrap up and conclude and not keep you any longer from the drinks. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, first thing is I think, yeah, we should get rid of those differences in the traditions, right? Because we see that we need all of that, right? We need the more classical solidarity-based organizations. We need the entrepreneurs. We need the technology, right? And instead of fighting each other, I think now's the time to really think about, what can each of us bring to the table? I think we were talking a lot about trust, a lot about values as well, right? I think the one common denominator here is that those are value-based organizations, right? So you shouldn't be too afraid of those, rather maybe from other organizations who are trying to, as the slavers that we had at the very beginning this morning, who are trying to just, maximize their profits. But I think this is really a community that, unfolds its biggest potential when it works together. I think I'd like to end on an optimistic note in terms of teaching students, right? Mario told you I'm at a business school, and I teach sustainability, and the one course that students seem to enjoy most is one where we give them maximum freedom. We tell them pick a sustainability challenge and then try to solve it. Whenever they do that, I always observe they're slipping back into their business model thinking, right? So they're like, how can I sell this? How can I set up the distribution? I'm like, forget about that. Start with a challenge. Find a solution, and then we can build something around that, right? But I think what's really hopeful here is that there's a lot of enthusiasm, right? And like students are like, as you were saying, accounting is becoming super sexy. Impact measurement, you will be surprised how engaged they are in something that's really research design, essentially, right? Like a classical methods course, and they're trying to find out, how do I assess this impact in qualitative, quantitative ways? How do I sharpen my capacity to grasp this? And I think we're offering a bit of it's very interesting that you say that's potentially even more like a handbook where you can find bits and pieces. We have one on social impact measurement and how that enables organizational learning. So I think the hopeful message here is that especially the younger generation is super excited about this, and they are acknowledging that this is actually the more complex, the more exciting, and the more challenging. And I think they want to tackle it.
Yes, excellent. So thank you very much for your contribution. That was excellent. And thank you for being with us. I think that we may have, okay. I know that I have to thank you and invite you to thank you for the wonderful hospitality, and invite you for a few more things. I was wondering whether we have a couple of minutes for a question from the audience. Two minutes. So if there is one or two questions or things that you feel you should share with us, we're happy. Yes. We have a mic.
Thank you so much for this, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book when it comes out. When will it come out?
You can check it out here. It's less than a month, I hope.
Perfect. One thing that really struck me, and it is somewhat depressing, having been in this sector for 20 years, and this being one of our first observations, is that there's a sort of Goldilocks point for funding a lot of these things, right? If you're too small, you can't get the funding. If you look like you're being too successful, you also can't get the funding. And so, how do you deal with that? Is this covered in the book? It strikes me the elephant in the room almost is, we know we're not short of ideas. We know that communities generate them. We know academics and research can stimulate them. We know there's lots of sources for social innovation, but where does the funding come from?
No, the point is really that you need to, and yes, we have something on that is really a systems-oriented approach, right? Where you think about the whole spectrum of funding, where you need to think about, how do you pool philanthropic finance, for instance, instead of having it project-based, to stretch it out over a longer period of time, right? Or where you have some kind of a partnership, even if it's a loose one, right? Of something that could go to the market, but maybe goes into the public sector, right? And so you can really sort of, I think, build a landscape that is taking each of those different cases. And that's the point, And that's a very pertinent point that people also don't get, right? Or used to not get, that it's like just much more complex and therefore also more exciting, because you have all of those different scenarios that could materialize, right? And you need to think about all of them in unison and then sort of act depending on what you have in front of you, right? Because if you only fix one thing, then you have one community covered, but you don't really go full in, and that's what we're trying to, nurture in a way through giving concrete examples of how that can look like.
One more, or yeah, one more, last one. I'm sorry.
The last one. Thank you. My question is very quickly. I heard you talk about social enterprises and commercial enterprises, but aren't we and shouldn't we challenge the distinction? Aren't most of our problems created by commercial enterprises? Can't they cross over? Can't commercial enterprises take the responsibility so that the weight and the responsibility don't fall only on social enterprises?
Yeah.
Addressing this?
No, absolutely. I mean, the point is really sort of breaking those boundaries and at the same time still staying true to the values, right? I think one of the problems that we had previously is always this win-win thinking. Someone had it earlier in the session, where we just have a problem there, right? Because whenever you think you can do stuff in a profitable way, you're moving away from what's the real solution to something that is market-based, right? It's not always a market-based solution that you want to find, but if you find that, and that's why we're also talking about the social economy as an agent of change in the sense of, really embedding ethics, value-based organizing. We have a chapter on, how artificial intelligence can be used for, actual problem solving instead of making things more convenient, right? And I think really moving into that area and trying to drag some of the more mainstream organizations into this, also preserving, for instance, the impact in impact investing versus ESG being a risk management tool. And these kinds of conversations, sort of always playing a bit the rogue agent, but at the same time pulling as many as you can along in order to sort of also dissolve this dichotomy to some degree.
Yeah, and consider that we are in the very middle of a dramatic evolutionary process. And the game contamination and competition between the two models is actually going on. And what we have to do is to make sure that the two competitors are on a level playing field, and everybody can bring the best of its DNA to the contamination process. Bio, yeah, and then that. Yeah.
Apologies. No, just on that, and in terms of the funding question as well, I think I rather like to position our work, because there's almost that same sort of movement when you consider our work and the types of learning that we gain, and we try to contaminate, if you would, the rest of the sector to behave in ways that are best suited to our community. Because if you support the most in need, you're naturally supporting and building better systems for everybody as a result. So there might be something about positioning this part of the sector as an innovation space for wider thinking. So if we start looking at it like that, we can start considering scale and technology in a social impact space for use in the wider sense in the future. So from the example that you brought up, if AI was first positioned within the impact space and then moved into the commercial space, that we would have much better outcomes, much better understanding, slower development, much more empathetic ways of building that solution, and much more understanding of the impact it would have on jobs and so on and so forth from the beginning, as opposed to all of the, now I'm speaking of, I think, a utopian world really, but that, for me, that feels like the way it should be. And if we start building programs and infrastructure and resources that suppose that lived experience, infrastructure support, finance, and technology can come together to create things that can then partner with commercial entities to grow and scale those solutions in different orbits, that feels like the way it should be.
Very good. We're, Eleanor, you're right? Okay. Mara, our splendid guest.
I'm really between your drinks and this session. I just want to thank you, Mario, for chairing this session. I want to thank you, the panelists, to give us some ideas. I want to thank you, Oxford University Press and the authors for making the book open access. If you go on the program, there is a link, and when the book will be finally published, you will be able to access and read it online. So thank you. It's very generous from the author to make it open access all the time. So thank you so much. So this marks the end of day one of the conference. For those of you online, I'll see you tomorrow at 9:15 start. For those of you here in Oxford, there are drinks and reception in the cafeteria upstairs. And don't get too comfy, because tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, we are meeting at Radcliffe Camera, which is one of the probably the most iconic classical building in Oxford, for a easy 30 minutes run for those who don't know Oxford. So we will go through some landmark. It's a beautiful town, and you don't have any time during the day to see it, but you will see it tomorrow morning at 7. At 8, breakfast will be served here and coffee. 9:15 start. We will have a packed day with 2 big picture sessions, 6 deep dives, 2 parallel sessions. We will have a public talk with Dame Margaret Hodge in conversation with Professor Carolyn Hodge. And after the public talk, we will have a closing remark, a gala with some surprise, and more drinks and dinner. So thank you so much, and see you upstairs for tomorrow.